The throne room of the Volanthi Empire had witnessed 10,000 years of history. Coronations and funerals and declarations of war had echoed off its crystalline walls. Treaties had been signed beneath its vaulted ceiling. Empires had knelt before the throne that now stood empty at the far end of the hall. Yanha entered the chamber and felt the weight of all those centuries pressing down upon her shoulders. Her cousin Minjay stood before the throne. He had always been handsome by Volanthi standards, with perfect silver eyes and hair like spun moonlight. Now those eyes were wild with fanaticism, and his elegant robes were stained with soot from the explosions he had helped orchestrate. In his hand he held a small device that glowed with ominous red light. "Cousin," Yanha said calmly, "I should have known." "You should have," Minjay agreed. "I have opposed this alliance with humans since its inception. I warned the court that these Deathworlders would contaminate our bloodline. I begged your father to break the betrothal, and when he refused, you decided to destroy everything. Instead, I decided to save our people from extinction." Minjay's voice rose with passionate conviction. "You do not understand what humans are, Yona. They are violence given form. They evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every moment of every day, and they became monsters in response. The man you call a monster saved my father's life, and then he infected our royal family with his presence." Minjay spat. 15 years that creature has lurked in the shadows of this palace. Watching you, wanting you, it is an abomination. Yanha took a step forward. The Marines behind her raised their weapons, but she held up a hand to stop them. "Tell me about the device in your hand." "Cousin," Minjay smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Explosives placed throughout the palace over the past several months, enough to reduce this entire structure to rubble. This trigger is connected to all of them. If I release my grip, even for a moment, everything dies, including yourself. A small price for ensuring our bloodline remains pure." Yanha studied her cousin with new eyes. She had known him her entire life. They had played together as children and studied together. As young adults, she had never seen the hatred that now twisted his features. "You are wrong about humans," she said quietly. "Am I?" "Yes. You see only their capacity for violence. You call them monsters because they come from a harsh world and learn to survive against impossible odds. But you ignore everything else. What else is there? Loyalty," Yanha replied. "Devotion beyond reason. Love that transcends logic and self-preservation. Dohyun spent 15 years protecting me while expecting nothing in return. He watched me from afar because he wanted me to be happy, even if my happiness meant forgetting he existed." Pretty words to describe an animal's obsession. "He nearly died today," Yanha continued as if Minjay had not spoken. "He stood in a doorway and faced dozens of your soldiers alone because I was behind him. He took wounds that would have killed any Volanthi 10 times over, and he kept fighting, not for glory or recognition, but because he loved me." Minjay's grip on the trigger tightened. "You speak of love as if it excuses everything. I speak of love because it is what you do not understand." Yanha took another step forward. "You see humans as savages because they evolved through violence. But you miss the truth. They are so fierce in battle precisely because they have so much to protect. Their capacity for destruction exists only to shield the things they cherish." Movement at the edge of her vision, Yanha did not turn, but she felt her hearts begin to race. Dohyun was supposed to be in the medical wing. He was supposed to be receiving treatment for wounds that should have killed him. Instead, he was limping through a side entrance, moving with painful slowness, his face pale from blood loss, but his brown eyes fixed on the scene before him. Minjay saw him too, the monster himself. Her cousin sneered. "Come to watch your prize die." Dohyun said nothing. He simply moved, not toward Minjay, toward Yanha. He placed himself between her and the blast radius, his body positioned so that if the explosives detonated, he would absorb the worst of the impact. "What are you doing?" Minjay demanded, and there was confusion in his voice now. "He is proving my point," Yanha said softly. "You expected him to attack you, to prove that humans are violent beasts who respond to every threat with aggression. Instead, he came to protect me. Even dying, even barely able to stand, his first instinct is not violence, but love." Minjae stared at Do-hyun. The human did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood as a shield, ready to die so that Yonha might live. "This proves nothing," Minjae said. But his voice wavered. "It proves everything," Yonha replied. "This is what humans are. Cousin, they are fierce and they are gentle. They are violent and they are tender. They will kill without hesitation to protect the ones they love, and they will die without complaint for the same reason. They are not monsters. They are devoted." Minja's hand trembled. The red light of the trigger flickered. "You are a fool." Yanha, blinded by sentiment for a creature that is not even truly capable of love as we understand it. Do-hyun spoke for the first time. "I have loved her since I was 23 years old." Minjae flinched. "I saw her laughing in a library and I forgot how to breathe." Do-hyun continued, his voice raw with pain and something deeper. "I have loved her through 15 years of watching from shadows, through 37 assassination attempts, through every moment of every day since I understood what she meant to me." He took a step forward despite his wounds. "You think humans cannot love because we come from a harsh world. You have it backwards. We love more fiercely because we understand how precious life is. We love more completely because we know how quickly everything can be taken away. Another step, I would die for Yana. I have nearly died for her many times. But more than that, I would live for her. I would wait 15 years for her. I would watch her choose someone else and be grateful that she was happy." He stood directly before Minjae now, close enough to touch. "That is what humans do for love. We give everything and expect nothing. We sacrifice and we endure and we wait, because the people we love are worth more than our own comfort or pride or even survival." Minjae's grip on the trigger faltered. For one terrible moment, Yonha thought he would activate the explosives anyway. Then his hand opened, the device clattered to the ground. Guards surged forward and seized him. Binding his wrists and hauling him away, Minjae screamed curses about contamination and monsters, but his words faded as they dragged him from the throne room. Yonha caught Do-hyun as his legs finally gave out. They sank to the crystalline floor together. Her arms wrapped around him as medics rushed toward them. "You impossible man," she whispered against his hair. "You were supposed to stay in the medical wing. I heard there was trouble, so you decided to nearly die again. I made no promises about my survival habits." "Your Highness," she laughed, and it turned into a sob halfway through. The weeks that followed were consumed by recovery and reconstruction. The palace was repaired. The traitors were brought to justice. The alliance between humans and Volanthi emerged stronger than before, forged in blood and proven in battle. And when the time came for Yana to formally acknowledge her betrothed before the court, she did so. Without hesitation, Do-hyun stood before the assembled nobility, his scars visible for all to see. He wore human formal attire rather than Volanthi robes, a deliberate choice that honored both their peoples. Yanha took his hands in hers and spoke the words that would bind them. "I choose you," she said clearly, "not because of ancient vows or political necessity. I choose you because you are loyal beyond measure, devoted beyond reason, and loving beyond anything I have ever known. I choose you, Do-hyun Park." Freely and completely, he removed the mask he still wore in public. His scarred face was visible to every noble in attendance. Some whispered, some stared. He did not seem to notice. "I have loved you for half my life," he said. "I expected nothing, asked for nothing, demanded nothing. But if you offer me everything, I will accept it with gratitude." He spoke the human wedding vow, in sickness and health, in joy and sorrow, until death do us part. I chose you 15 years ago. I choose you now. I will choose you every day we have left. Yonha kissed him in front of the entire court. The whispers turned to gasps. She did not care. Months later, they stood before the Galactic Council as representatives of the human Volanthi. Alliance other species watched them with curiosity and suspicion. A princess who had married a scarred soldier. A Deathworlder who had won an empire's daughter through patience and devotion. They whispered about what it meant. They wondered what kind of future such a union would create. Yonha simply took her husband's hand and smiled. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. She knew what humans were capable of when they loved someone. She knew what this particular human had sacrificed for her. And she considered herself the luckiest being in the galaxy to be loved by him. Do-yoon squeezed her hand gently. His brown eyes, once unremarkable, now seemed to contain entire universes when he looked at her. Ready? He asked. With you? She replied. Always. They walked into the council chamber together, princes and warrior, bound not by ancient vows or political necessity, but by choice, by love, by everything that made humans remarkable and everything that made them human. Smoke poured through corridors that had stood unchanged for 10,000 years, and the screams of guards and servants echoed off crystalline walls that now ran red with blood. Yonha ran through the chaos with Do-hyun's hand locked around hers like an anchor. He had acquired weapons within the first 30 seconds of leaving the medical wing, taking them from fallen guards with efficient movements that spoke of endless practice. Now he moved through the palace like death itself had taken human form. 3 attackers emerged from a side corridor. Do-hyun released Yonha's hand, put himself between her and the threat, and killed all 3 before she could draw breath to scream. He took a blade across his forearm in the exchange. He did not slow down. Who is doing this? Yonha demanded as they pressed forward. Varakeen Dominion. Based on their armor markings, Do-hyun replied. They have been opposed to the Human Volanthi Alliance since its inception. How did they breach the palace? They had help from inside. The implication struck Yonha like a physical blow. A traitor within the court, someone she trusted, had sold them to their enemies. They reached the central atrium and found a scene of devastating battle. Palace guards fought desperately against Varakeen soldiers, their elegant weapons clashing against the brutal efficiency of military-grade hardware. The Volanthi were losing. Do-hyun assessed the situation in a heartbeat. We cannot go through, he said. We need to reach the communications center and call for reinforcements. The secondary passage, Yonha said. Through the archive of bonds, they changed direction and moved through corridors that grew quieter as they left the main battle behind. The archive was empty when they entered, its holographic records flickering with interference from the explosions rocking the palace. Do-hyun sealed the doors behind them and began accessing the communication systems. There is a human vessel in orbit, he reported. The diplomatic cruiser Endurance. If I can reach them, they can deploy Marines within minutes. Do it. He worked the controls with fingers that should have been shaking, but remained perfectly steady. Yonha watched him and wondered how many times he had faced death like this. How many battles had he survived through sheer refusal to fall? The communication link opened and Do-hyun spoke rapidly in a human language Yonha did not understand. The response was immediate and the tone suggested urgent action. They are coming, Do-hyun said. 20 minutes until arrival. Can we hold that long? Before he could answer, the archive doors exploded inward. Varakeen soldiers poured through the breach. Their weapons raised. Do-hyun moved. Yonha had seen him fight before, but nothing had prepared her for this. He was still injured from the garden attack, and the medical wing blood soaked his uniform from the wound on his arm. Yet he fought like something from legend, something that did not understand the concept of surrender. He killed the first 2 soldiers with their own weapons, turning their momentum against them. He broke the third soldier's neck with his bare hands. The fourth managed to shoot him in the shoulder. Before Doyen drove a knife through his eye, more soldiers came. Doyen kept fighting. Yanha watched in horror and awe as this human, this scarred and bleeding man who had loved her for 15 years, stood against impossible odds and refused to fall. A Varakine blade caught him across the back. He staggered and kept fighting. A plasma bolt grazed his leg. He adjusted his stance and kept fighting. He was dying by centimeters, and he would not stop. Doyen. Yanha screamed, "Stay back. You cannot win this alone." "I do not need to win," he gasped between strikes. "I need to keep you alive until reinforcements arrive. That is all that matters." The soldiers fell back to regroup, and Doyen used the moment to position himself in front of the only remaining exit. He stood in the doorway like a wall of flesh, and will and absolute determination. Blood dripped from a dozen wounds. His breathing was ragged. He could barely stand, but his eyes, those brown eyes she had once thought unremarkable, burned with something that made the Varakine soldiers hesitate. "You will not touch her," he said, and his voice carried through the archive like a death sentence. "You will have to kill me first, and I promise you that I will take as many of you with me as I can." "He is one human," a Varakine commander snarled. Overwhelming, they charged. Yanha moved without thinking. She grabbed a ceremonial blade from a display case and threw herself forward, placing herself beside Doyen in the doorway. "Your Highness." "No, I will not let you die alone," she said fiercely. "You are my betrothed, my husband by law and ancient vow. I do not leave my husband to die." Doyen stared at her for one crystalline moment. The battle seemed to pause. Something shifted in his expression. Something that had been closed off for 15 years finally cracking open. "You called me your husband, because you are. You have been for 15 years. You stupid, stubborn, beautiful man. And I refuse to lose you now that I have finally found you." The first Varakine reached them, and Doyen killed him with renewed fury. But there was something different in his movements now. Before, he had been fighting to protect. Now he was fighting to survive. He was fighting because she had given him something to live for. Side by side, they held the doorway. Yanha was not trained for combat, but she was Valanti, and her people moved with natural grace. She guarded Doyen's injured side, and he covered her weaknesses. They fought as one being, two hearts beating in synchronization. Still the enemies came. Still they held. But they could not hold forever. Yanha felt her arms growing heavy and saw Doyen's movements slowing as blood loss took its toll. They were going to die here together. There were worse ways to end. She thought, at least they found each other first. A new sound cut through the chaos. The heavy thunder of human weapons. The Varakine soldiers at the rear of the formation began to fall. Cut down by precise fire from behind, human marines poured into the archive, their armor scarred from rapid deployment, their weapons spitting death at anything that threatened their princess. Doyen sagged against the doorframe. Yanha caught him before he could fall. "Stay with me," she demanded. "You do not have permission to die. Do you understand? I am the Imperial Princess, and I forbid it. As you command." "Your Highness," he whispered, and impossibly. He smiled. The battle ended quickly after that. Human efficiency, combined with Valanti reinforcements, swept the remaining attackers from the palace. Medics rushed to Doyen's side, and Yanha refused to release his hand even as they worked. "The palace is secure," a Marine captain reported. "But we have identified the source of the security breach." "Who?" "A member of your own court, Your Highness. We have him cornered in the throne room." Yanha looked down at Doyen. His eyes were closed, but his grip on her hand remained firm. "Go," he murmured. "I will live. Humans are hard to kill. Remember, she leaned down and pressed her lips to his forehead. I will return, she promised. And then we are going to have a very long conversation about your habit of nearly dying. I look forward to it. Yonha stood and straightened her blood-stained robes. Her hands were steady, and her silver eyes were cold with fury. Someone had betrayed them. Someone had nearly cost her everything, and they were going to answer for it. She marched toward the throne room with human marines at her back. Whatever awaited her there, she would face it. She was Volanthi. She was a princess, and she had learned something. From the human who loved her, she had learned that love was worth fighting for, even when fighting seemed hopeless, even when the odds were impossible. Especially then, the throne room doors loomed before her. She pushed them open and stepped inside to confront the traitor who had tried to destroy everything she had only just begun to cherish. Emperor Junwu of the Volanthi Empire was not a man who showed surprise easily. He had ruled for 60 cycles and seen empires rise and fall. He had negotiated with warlords and tyrants, and being so alien that communication required machines to translate not just words but concepts. Yet when his daughter stormed into his private chambers at dawn and demanded the truth about her betrothed, something flickered across his ancient features. You know, he said quietly. I know, Yonha confirmed. Now I want to hear it from you. The emperor gestured for her to sit. She remained standing. He sighed and began to speak. 15 years ago, during the border negotiations with the human delegation, raiders attacked our position, Junwu said, his silver eyes distant with memory. I was their primary target. The assassination of a Volanthi emperor would have destabilized the entire sector. I have read the official reports. The official reports do not capture what happened, her father replied. A human soldier, barely more than a boy by their standards, saw the explosive device before anyone else. He threw himself on top of me and used his own body as a shield. Yonha said nothing. The blast should have killed him instantly. Junwu continued. It nearly did. I watched him die twice on the operating table before their physicians managed to stabilize him. When he finally regained consciousness, weeks later, I went to see him. What did he say? He apologized for the inconvenience of his survival? The words struck Yonha like a physical blow. He apologized? Humans have a strange relationship with self-sacrifice, Junwu explained. They consider it unremarkable when they risk themselves for others. This young soldier was more concerned that his medical treatment was consuming resources than he was about his own condition. And you offered him my hand in marriage. I offered him anything within my power to grant, the emperor said firmly. He had saved my life at the cost of his own body. His face was destroyed. His organs were failing. His future was agony and disability. Yet when I asked what he wanted, he made only one request. What did he ask for? He asked if he could meet you, Junwu said. Just once before he died, he wanted to see the princess whose father he had saved. He had heard stories about the Volanthi imperial family and wanted to know if you were as remarkable as the tale suggested. Yonha felt tears prick at her silver eyes. I brought him to you. Her father continued. You were barely an adult, studying in the archive wing. You did not notice the scarred human watching you from across the room. You were reading poetry and laughing at something in the text. He watched you for perhaps 10 minutes before asking to leave. Did he say anything? He said you were more beautiful than any story could capture. Junwu's voice softened. And then he asked me to promise him something. What promise? He asked me to take care of you. He knew he was dying, and he wanted to ensure that someone would always protect you. I told him that I would offer him something better. I would give him a reason to survive. The betrothal. Yes. I promised him your hand in marriage if he lived. I expected him to die within days. He was too damaged, too broken. Survival was impossible. The Emperor shook his head slowly. But humans do not understand impossible. He lived. He lived. Through sheer will and stubbornness, he refused to die. When he finally recovered enough to function, nearly a year later, he came to me and did something I did not expect. What did he do? He released me from my promise, Junwoo said. He told me that a vow made to a dying man was no true vow. He said that you deserved to choose your own husband rather than be bound to a scarred soldier you had never met. Yonha wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. Then why is he still here? Why is he my bodyguard? Because he made one request, her father replied. He asked permission to serve in your protection detail. He wanted to ensure your safety from a distance, never expecting you to know of his existence, never demanding anything in return for his devotion. 15 years, Yonha whispered. 15 years he has watched over you, Junwoo confirmed. Every assignment that placed him near the palace, every security detail that allowed him to see you from afar. He has refused promotions and turned down prestigious postings to remain close enough to protect you. How many threats has he stopped? The Emperor hesitated. Father. 37 confirmed assassination attempts over 15 years, Junwoo admitted. Most of them you never knew about because Sergeant Park eliminated the threats before they could reach you. Yonha sat down heavily in the nearest chair. 37 times this man had saved her life without ever revealing himself. 37 times he had put himself between her and death, and she had not known he existed until weeks ago. Why did you not tell me? Because it was his wish, her father said simply. He wanted you to be free, to choose your own path without the weight of obligation to a stranger. I honored his sacrifice by respecting his choice. And the betrothal ceremony, the husband who was supposed to arrive this month? Junwoo smiled sadly. I grew tired of watching him suffer in silence. I contacted him 3 months ago and told him that the time had come to honor our original agreement. He argued, of course. He insisted that you should not be bound to him, but you overruled him. I am the Emperor, Junwoo said. Some privileges remain. I told him he would present himself as your betrothed, or I would reveal everything to you myself. He agreed on the condition that if you showed any reluctance, he would immediately withdraw his claim. Yonha stood and walked to the window. The twin suns were rising over the crystalline plains, painting the world in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in the palace, Do-hyun was probably searching for her, concerned about her absence from her chambers. I need to speak with him, she said. Yes, you do. She found him in the medical wing, his wounds from the garden attack had reopened during a training exercise, and the physicians had insisted on additional treatment. He lay on a bed with sensors attached to his scarred chest, his brown eyes closed in something that might have been rest. Yonha entered quietly and sat in the chair beside his bed. She watched him for a long moment, seeing him truly for the first time. The scars on his face told a story of unimaginable pain. The lines of his body spoke of years of combat and sacrifice. Yet his hands, resting on the white sheets, were gentle. Those hands had killed to protect her. Those same hands had caught a falling servant with infinite care. I know you are awake, she said softly. His eyes opened. He looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. He knew somehow. He knew that she had discovered the truth. Your Highness, he began. Do not. Yonha cut him off. Do not pretend, not now. I know who you are. I know what you did. I know everything. Do-hyun was silent. 15 years, she continued, her voice trembling. You have watched over me for 15 years. You have saved my life more times than I can count. You have asked for nothing, expected nothing, demanded nothing. You deserve to be free. Free? Yonha laughed, and there were tears on her cheeks. I was free to forget you existed, free to live my life while you bled in the shadows, free to prepare for marriage to a stranger who was standing beside me the entire time. I wanted it that way. Why? He sat up slowly, wincing at the pull of his wounds, because a vow made under duress is no vow at all. He said, your father promised you to a dying man. You signed a document as a child. Neither of you truly chose this. I wanted you to have the chance to choose freely, even if you never chose me. Yonha reached out and touched his scarred face. He flinched as if her fingers burned him. 15 years, she whispered. You waited 15 years for a woman who did not remember you. I would have waited 50 more. Why? Because I saw you laughing over poetry in the archive wing, he said quietly. Because I watched you become the woman you are today, brave and brilliant and kind. Because I fell in love with you the moment I saw you, and I have loved you every day since, even knowing you would never love me back. Yonha leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. You are a fool, she said. I know. A stubborn, self-sacrificing, impossible fool. Yes, and I am beginning to think I might love you for it. Before he could respond, alarms began to wail throughout the palace. Red lights flashed and the ground trembled with distant explosions. Do-yoon was on his feet instantly, pain forgotten, his hand reaching for weapons that were not there. What is happening? Yon had demanded a guard burst through the medical wing doors, his face pale with fear. Your Highness, we are under attack. The palace has been breached. Do-yoon grabbed Yonna's hand and pulled her toward the door. Stay behind me, he ordered. And his voice had transformed from the soft tones of moments ago to something cold and hard and deadly. Do you have weapons? I will acquire some. They plunged into chaos together. The princess and her warrior, the truth finally spoken between them, and somewhere in the burning palace, enemies waited who did not understand what they had awakened. The imperial palace of Volanthi. Prime rose from the crystalline plains like a frozen wave caught mid-crash. Its spires reached toward the twin suns, and its halls stretched for kilometers in every direction. Yonha had lived within these walls her entire life, but they had never felt so suffocating as they did now. 3 weeks had passed since the assassination attempt at the summit. 3 weeks of preparation for her upcoming marriage to a human she could not remember ever meeting. 3 weeks of her silent guardian shadowing her every step. She stood now in the archive of bonds, surrounded by holographic records that stretch back 10,000 years. Every marriage, every betrothal, every alliance sealed through union was recorded here in perfect detail. Soin, her handmaiden and closest friend, helped her navigate the ancient filing system. Here it is. Your Highness, Soin said, her silver eyes scanning the glowing text. The betrothal agreement from 15 cycles ago. Yonha leaned forward to read. The document described an incident she barely remembered during the early days of human contact. A border skirmish had erupted between Volanthi forces and raiders from the outer territories. Emperor Junwoo himself had been present for diplomatic talks when the attack occurred. A human soldier, newly assigned to the joint peacekeeping force, had thrown himself between the Emperor and an explosive device. The blast had torn the human apart by all medical understanding. He should have died. The records stated that 70% of his body required reconstruction. His face was damaged beyond recognition. His internal organs failed multiple times during surgery. Yet somehow, impossibly, he survived. Ingratitude. Emperor Junwoo had offered the greatest gift a Volanthi ruler could bestow, the hand of his youngest daughter in marriage. The human had accepted. Yonha had been 13 cycles old at the time, too young to fully understand what she was agreeing to when she signed her name beside her father's. She had promptly forgotten about the entire arrangement. Now it was coming due. What else does it say about him? Yana asked. This human I am supposed to marry. Soyin scrolled through the records. Very little. Your Highness, she admitted. His name and service record are sealed at the highest classification level, accessible only to the Emperor himself. Sealed? Why would my own betrothed's identity be hidden from me? I do not know, but there is one detail available. Soyin pointed to a line of text. His medical status following the incident. He was not expected to survive his injuries. The betrothal was made assuming he would die, and the agreement would become void. Yonha felt something cold settle in her stomach. He was dying when my father promised me to him. Yes. Your Highness. The physicians gave him a 3% chance of survival, and yet he lived. Humans are remarkably difficult to kill, Soyin said, and there was something odd in her voice. I have been reading about them since Sergeant Park was assigned to you. They are fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. Yonha thought of Do-Yoon standing in that darkened corridor, surrounded by the bodies of assassins, bleeding from a wound that should have incapacitated him. Yes, she agreed quietly. They are. She spent the following days researching humans with an intensity that surprised even herself. She learned that humans formed pair bonds of extraordinary strength. Unlike many species who viewed marriage as primarily political or reproductive, humans attached deep emotional significance to the union. They spoke of something called love, an irrational attachment that defied logic and often led them to sacrifice everything for their chosen partner. Most remarkably, humans frequently refused to take new partners after losing a spouse. They would spend decades alone, faithful to someone who no longer existed, simply because they had made a promise. The concept fascinated Yana, her betrothed. She read in the fragments of information available. Had never taken another partner in the 15 years since their agreement. He had waited for her, a woman he had never truly met, who had signed her name as a child and promptly forgotten him. He had waited 15 years. Yonha found herself paying closer attention to Do-Yoon in the days that followed. She noticed things she had overlooked before. He knew her preferences. Without being told, when servants brought tea, the cup placed before her was always the blend she favored, though she had never mentioned it to anyone on her current staff. Do-Yoon positioned himself in precisely the spots where she felt most secure, as if he had studied her habits for years rather than weeks. When she changed for the evening, he turned away before she could request privacy, granting her dignity without being asked. Small things, insignificant things. Things that only someone who had watched her for a very long time would know. The realization crept over her slowly, like dawn breaking over the crystalline plains. Another assassination attempt came on a quiet afternoon. Yonha was walking in the palace gardens when a figure dropped from the ornamental trees above her. Blade gleaming in the sunlight, Do-Yoon intercepted the attacker before Yonha could even scream. They fought among the flowering bushes. A brutal exchange of strikes and counters that lasted perhaps 10 seconds. It ended with Do-Yoon driving his knife through the assassin's throat. But the assassin had landed a blow first. A long cut opened across Do-Yoon's chest, slicing through his armor and the flesh beneath. He staggered but did not fall. Your Highness, he said, his voice steady despite the blood soaking his uniform. Please return to the palace. I will ensure the grounds are clear. You are injured. I am functional. You are bleeding significantly. I am still functional. Guards arrived, and the chaos of another security breach consumed the afternoon. Yonha insisted on accompanying Do-Yoon to the medical wing despite protests from her advisors. She told herself it was because she needed to ensure her protector received proper care. She knew it was something more. The medical staff worked quickly, their instruments humming as they sealed the wound. Yonha sat in the corner of the treatment room and watched. Do-Yoon had removed his armor and his upper garments to allow the medics access. His torso was a map of scars. Some were surgical, precise lines from reconstruction efforts. Others were ragged, the marks of blades and claws and weapons she could not identify. But it was his face that captured her attention. With his mask removed for treatment, she could see him fully for the first time. Extensive scarring covered the right side of his face, pulling at his eye and twisting his mouth slightly. The damage was old, long healed, and clearly the result of catastrophic injury burns. Perhaps, or an explosion, Yanha remembered. The record she had read 70% of his body required reconstruction. His face was damaged beyond recognition. She felt her heart begin to race. "How old are those scars?" she asked softly. Do-hyun's brown eyes met hers. 15 years, Your Highness." The medics finished their work and departed. Yanha remained seated. Do-hyun made no move to replace his mask. They looked at each other across the small room, and something unspoken passed between them. "I want to see your service record," Yanha said finally. "It is classified. I am the Imperial Princess. I can demand its release." "You could," he agreed. "But I would ask that you do not." "Why?" He was silent for a long moment. "Because some truths are easier not to know." Yanha returned to her chambers that evening with her mind churning. She found Soyeon waiting for her with an expression of barely contained urgency. "Your Highness." "I found something," Soyeon whispered, glancing toward the door where Do-hyun had resumed his position. "The sealed records of your betrothed. I could not access the full file, but I found a reference number, and the reference number matches a current service record in the Galactic Shield Corps." Yanha felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Whose record? Soyeon's silver eyes were wide with disbelief. "Sergeant Do-hyun Park." "Your Highness." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Yanha turned slowly to look at the door, at the masked figure standing guard beyond. At the man she had been preparing to marry as a stranger, the man who had protected her for weeks, without ever revealing himself, the man who had waited 15 years for a princess who forgot he existed. They were the same person. She pressed her hand against her chest, where her twin hearts hammered against her ribs. "Are you certain?" "The numbers match exactly," Soyeon confirmed. "Your betrothed and your bodyguard are the same man." Yanha closed her eyes. She thought of all the small kindnesses she had noticed that T prepared. Exactly. Right, the positions chosen for her. Comfort, the privacy granted. Without request, he knew her because he had been watching her for 15 years, protecting her from the shadows, waiting for a day that might never come. "Does he know that I know?" Yanha whispered. "I do not think so." Yanha opened her eyes and made a decision. "Wake me early tomorrow," she instructed Soyeon. "I need to speak with my father. And then I need to have a very important conversation with my betrothed." Outside her chambers, Do-hyun stood guard through the night, unaware that his secret was no longer his own. Princess Yanha of the Third Moon stood at the observation deck of the Imperial cruiser and watched the stars drift past like scattered diamonds against velvet darkness. She had attended 17 diplomatic summits in her 28 cycles of life, and each one felt more exhausting than the last. The galaxy was changing, and not for the better. 3 royal assassinations in the past year alone had sent shockwaves through every noble house from the core worlds to the outer rim. Her father, Emperor Junwoo of the Volanthi Empire, had insisted she accept protection for this journey. She had argued against it for days, but the Emperor would not bend. "You will have a guardian from the Galactic Shield Corps," he had declared in that tone that permitted no debate. "And you will accept their presence without complaint." Now she waited in the docking bay as the shuttle from the Shield Corps vessel approached. The Volanthi were a tall species with pale blue skin and silver eyes that reflected light like mirrors. They valued grace and elegance above all things. Their warriors moved like dancers, and their politicians spoke in poetry. Yanha embodied these ideals perfectly. She stood with perfect posture and robes of midnight purple. Her white hair arranged in elaborate braids that had taken her handmaiden Soyen 3 hours to complete. The shuttle landed with a mechanical hiss, and the doors slid open. A figure emerged, and Yanha felt her silver eyes widen despite her training. In courtly composure, the human was not what she expected. He stood shorter than most. Valanti males, but his shoulders were broad, and his frame suggested dense muscle beneath the dark tactical armor he wore. A mask covered the lower half of his face, leaving only his eyes visible. Those eyes were brown, an unremarkable color by galactic standards, but something in them made Yana's skin prickle with unease. He moved toward her with efficient steps. No wasted motion, no flourish. When he stopped before her, he offered a bow that was technically correct but lacked any of the flowing grace her people prized. "Your Highness," he said, and his voice through the mask was low and slightly distorted. "I am Sergeant Doying Park of the Galactic Shield Corps, assigned to your protection detail for the duration of the summit." Yanha inclined her head, the minimum amount politeness demanded. "Sergeant Park," she replied coolly. "I trust you understand that I accepted this arrangement only at my father's insistence." "I understand perfectly, Your Highness." He said nothing more. No assurances of his skill or promises of her safety. No attempts to make himself agreeable. Just silence. Yanha found it oddly refreshing and deeply irritating in equal measure. The journey to the summit station took 3 days. During that time, Yanha learned several things about her human guardian. He ate alone and sparingly. He slept in 4-hour intervals rather than the 8 hours humans supposedly required. He checked every room she entered before she was permitted inside, and he positioned himself always between her and the nearest exit. He spoke perhaps 50 words total in those 3 days. On the second evening, Yanha witnessed something that cracked her assumptions about him. One of her servants, a young Valanthi woman named Hana, stumbled while carrying a tray of refreshments. She would have fallen badly, the tray's contents likely scarring her with hot liquid. Doyen moved. Yanha had never seen anything alive move so fast. One moment he stood by the door, and the next he was across the room, one arm catching Hana around the waist while his other hand stabilized the tray. He set her gently on her feet, ensured she was steady, and returned to his position by the door. The entire sequence took perhaps 2 heartbeats. Hana stared at him. With wide eyes, Yanha stared at him with new consideration. "Thank you," Hana whispered. Doyun simply nodded once. That night, Yanha accessed the Imperial archives and read about humans. What she found disturbed her. Humans came from a world called Earth, a planet so dangerous that galactic scientists classified it as a Category 12 death world. Everything on Earth seemed designed to kill. The predators, the weather, the diseases, even the plants. Humans had evolved in this crucible of violence and emerged as something the galaxy had rarely seen. They were persistent predators who could chase prey for days without rest. Their bones healed stronger after breaking. Their immune systems adapted to new threats with frightening speed. They could survive injuries that would kill most species instantly and keep fighting through pain that would render others unconscious. The galaxy called them Death Worlders and treated them with wary respect. Yanha wondered what kind of monster her father had assigned to protect her. The summit began, and with it came the tedious rounds of negotiation and political maneuvering that Yanha knew so well. She smiled at rivals and embraced allies and spoke careful words that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. Doyun shadowed her through it all. He never spoke unless addressed directly. He never interfered with her conversations. He simply existed as a Tista's constant presence at the edge of her vision. Those brown eyes watching everything. On the 3rd night of the summit, the assassins came. Yanha was returning to her quarters after a late dinner with the consortium delegates when the lights in the corridor flickered and died. She heard the soft whisper of movement in the darkness. before she could react. Do-hyun's hand closed around her arm and pulled her against the wall. "Stay down," he breathed. And then he was gone. The sounds that followed would haunt Yeon-ha for years. She heard bodies hitting the floor. She heard the wet crack of bones breaking. She heard a scream cut short with terrible finality when the emergency lights activated 30 seconds later. Yeon-ha saw 4 bodies on the corridor floor. They wore the black garments of professional killers, and each one had been dispatched with brutal efficiency. Do-hyun stood among them, breathing hard, a knife in each hand. His armor showed scoring from plasma fire, and a dark stain spread across his left side where a blade had found its mark. He turned to her, and those brown eyes checked her from head to toe. "Are you injured?" "Your Highness?" Yeon-ha stared at the carnage around them. "You killed them," she said, her voice strange in her own ears. "They intended to kill you. You placed yourself between me and their weapons. That is my function. You could have died." Do-hyun wiped his blades clean on one of the assassin's garments and sheathed them. "Yes. Why would you die for someone you met 3 days ago?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Yeon-ha saw something flicker in those unremarkable brown eyes, something old and tired and impossibly sad. "It is my duty." "Your Highness," he said quietly. Nothing more. He was lying. Yeon-ha had spent her entire life surrounded by politicians and diplomats. She knew the texture of lies as intimately as she knew her own heartbeat. This human, this masked warrior, who had just killed 4 assassins to protect her, was lying about his reasons. The question was why security forces arrived, and the next several hours dissolved into statements and medical treatment and urgent communications with her father. Through it all, Do-hyun remained at her side, even as medics treated the wound in his side that would have killed a Volanthi from blood loss alone. He refused sedation. He refused to leave her presence. Yeon-ha watched him and wondered what secrets hid behind that mask. Late that night, after the chaos had settled, a communication arrived from her father. Yeon-ha read it twice to ensure she understood correctly. Her childhood betrothed, a human warrior she had never met and barely remembered agreeing to marry, would arrive at the Pavate Imperial Palace within the month to finalize their union. She had forgotten about that arrangement entirely. It had been made 15 years ago, when she was barely an adult by Volanthi standards. A political necessity during the early days of human-Volanthi relations. Now that forgotten promise was coming due. Yeon-ha looked across her quarters to where Do-hyun stood guard by the door. She would have to marry a stranger, some human she had never seen strangely. The thought bothered her less than it once might have. She had seen what humans were capable of tonight. Perhaps having one bound to her by marriage would not be the worst fate imaginable. She just wished she did not feel so oddly comfortable around the silent guardian who watched over her sleep. That comfort made no sense. She had known him only days. Yet something about his presence felt familiar in a way she could not explain. Yeon-ha closed her eyes and tried not to think about the masked warrior standing vigil in her doorway. She failed entirely.